All right, everybody. We've got another very special guest for you all this week. Everybody, please welcome to the show L.A. Cunningham or Lori Cunningham. Welcome to the show, Lori.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Lori, you're a first-time guest, so we got to do that thing. We got to do the origin story. What got you into comics? Were you always into them? Did you come to later in life? Like, how'd you come about doing this?
Definitely later in life, like very recently, like basically I started like becoming a fan of comics as I started writing comics. So ASAP
Interesting.
Imagination, the owner is Hades. And he basically we met through Twitter. I was kind of trying to be a novelist at the time,
Mhm.
and we just got along, and he was like in his 9 to 5 and starting he was working on a comic with Kyle Wright, who is the illustrator of one of their first comic. And they did the thing where they're like submitting it to like Dark Horse and stuff and not hearing anything back. And then the pandemic hit, and basically Hades is just like, screw it, I'm just gonna start my own company. So he left his 9 to 5, and like I was just on the sideline, like I'm trying to think of where I was at in life. Like by then I was like, I had like a less than 1 year old like new baby situation. I wasn't really trying to write like but I was needed something to kind of like keep me back into like my kind of low expectations for myself. But I was getting antsy, and he's just like, well, we should do a project together. And he'd always kind of plan like that when we first met. That was kind of like how we were gonna do. That was kind of the thing. We're like, hey, let's write something together. Like that'd be fun. Um, and it was always going to be circled around like an event, and we were going to tell it from multiple perspectives. And he was basically like, well, I have a comic book universe that has literally something called The Event. Like, perhaps we should do that. And I was like, no, that's crazy. Like, I'm so busy. Like, I'm postpartum depression, like super overwhelmed, and like new mom, like literally no idea what I'm doing. And then by the time I got off the phone call, I'm like, okay, I have my first idea for a story, because there's going to be a whole bunch of short stories. So we just kind of started doing that. And then at the time, like I was still like kind of, it's supposed to be a one-off project, and I was just cheering him along, and we got it out. We published a book. We basically timed that with his first comic book, Messiah #1, which was like the flagship debut comic for ASAP. And we put it through Kickstarter, and it funded. But yeah, while we were writing this story, there's basically two very obvious stories that connect like it's a flip book. Oh, I do have it. For the longest time, I didn't have copies, and then I got new stock. So I kept being like, oh, it's this. But now I can actually do it. So it's like this, and then you like flip it over. So it's like eight stories of kind of like basically a countdown to the event. And then you flip it over, and it's kind of 8 stories like right after the event happens, and kind of a little more sporadic. And it all kind of ties together. But these 2 stories tied together, and one was told from this young girl's perspective, and she's fleeing the city with her parents. And it's very like she's very young, so it's like naive, like she's sleeping in a car seat, and like all this stuff is happening, like randomly wakes up, like needs to stop to pee and all this stuff. And then you flip it over, and it's basically her mom, which is Lily Connors, is going back to London. It's an alternate London with superheroes and paranormal events. And she's a doctor, and she's being haunted by basically her past patients, because all this paranormal, terrifying stuff's happening. And then eventually she has an encounter with the physical form of death. And then, so like, after that, Hades is kind of like, hey, this is a comic book character. I'm like, okay, neat. What does that mean to me? And he's just like, well, you should write a comic book with this character. And again, I was like, absolutely not. Like, that's crazy. Like, this wasn't like on my radar at all. But then I was kind of like, but hypothetically, like, what would that look like? And I'd been reading his scripts and kind of like editing them. And so, yeah, basically, he was very persuasive, and I started writing comics. And that was kind of like, other than reading his scripts, I hadn't really like been paying attention to things too much. But now that you're like, okay, write a comic. At that time, there was 4 of us in ASAP. There was me, him, Nem or DW Howard, and Sarah Butcher. She's since left to go be a novelist, but Nem is still around. So Hades and Nem were basically like, they created a little folder for me on our shared drive, and it was like Lori's comic homework, like LOL. It's just like, here's all the things you need to watch. Here's all the things you need to read. And I was writing like a dark, like Sister Grimm is like, that's like the comic that came out of this. It was like a dark fantasy leaning horror-ish kind of thing. So I was reading like Ghost Rider and like was watching Constantine and stuff like that. So that's like kind of where I started. But actually like before that, Watchmen was kind of, I forget where I like fell in, but people were recommending like other stuff to read as well. And that was kind of like I'd seen the movie and like way back when I hadn't like paid attention to it. And then I like read the book and that was kind of the moment where I'm like, okay, maybe I could do this because this is pretty sweet. Like I got to that chapter with Dr. Manhattan when he's basically like giving his history, but it's like the whole like time is nothing to him. So he's like giving like his future and his past and his present all at the same time. And I'm like, how would you even do this like without a comic? I don't understand how you would tell this story. And so that was kind of the moment where like, man, is this what comics can do? I'm like, yeah, I want to be a part of that. So that was like the like adult corruption. Like when I was little, I watched like Calvin and Hobbes, Archie, Garfield, and then I would watch a lot of the shows like X-Men, Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles, and watching shows I didn't even know like Blade was part of like a comic book, but I was like watching movies and stuff, and so I'd watch a whole bunch of that stuff. So that's like my general how I got into comics in a long-winded nutshell.
So they had you read like a bunch of horror-esque comics. Was there anything after that homework that you started to dive into that you really enjoyed?
Since then, I've kind of like just being in the indie world. I think it's been a lot of just backing indies and kind of getting into. There's a few things I'm like slowly dipping my toes into because I found just comics to be overwhelming because I was just like, oh, I'm gonna get into comics. Like I'm gonna read Batman, and then I'm like, oh, Batman's like 80 years of comics, and then it's like there's this storyline and this storyline and this storyline, and these ones connect back up, and then there's like these little side storylines and like other titles. I'm like. It just felt like super overwhelming to me. So there was like a few, like graphic novels were kind of my jam because I'm like, okay, it's kind of like a complete story. Like even I read a Ghost Rider omnibus. I think that's what it was, and it was still just like a whole bunch of issues, and I was still kind of like again, I'd seen the movies, but I was still like, and kind of knew like the general like Ghost Rider, like who he is, like what's his origin story is, but like I didn't really understand what was happening because it felt kind of like scattered. And then all of a sudden I think the Hulk appears, and then like there's all on Doctor Strange I think is in one of them, so it's like all this like little like sneaking in other stuff where I'm like, what the hell is going on? So it was just like, it just felt like a lot. But now I've started to like I've gone into Hellboy, like more mainstream stuff, and I started reading Walking Dead, and like there's a whole bunch of stuff that I own that I haven't like started read, like Sandman, and I don't know, just a few things.
Yeah, I always say like mainstream big two comics, so Marvel and DC, take a certain brain to get into. Like I have to, as someone who reads every week, I even have to like give up on certain things. Like there's certain things I will never know or read about these characters just because, like you said, Batman, there's 80 years. I can't read 80 years of comics. Like that's just never going to happen unless I solely dedicate myself to Batman. But what I've found to get people just into the world, like introducing them to something like Saga, or like you said, Hellboy, or Walking Dead, or some IP that they know, and it's just a great, here's X amount of issues, you just have to read these. It's not 80 years of it, is usually the best way to get people in the world.
Yeah, well, and I find that's the tricky thing too, because when I first started doing this, I would like post on like Twitter and been like, hey, like, does anyone have any comic book recommendation? Or like, tell me your favorite comic. And people be like, here's my top 50 favorite comics. And they're just like all over the place. And they're like Bone. And then it just, in the random issues, it'd be like, oh, Kingdom Come and like Year One and all this stuff. Like, it's just all over the place. I'm like, you guys, stop. Like, I asked for one to first of all, which apparently like that's not a thing anyways. Like there's no, like, I don't think I've ever found someone who's like, this is my definitive favorite comic ever. Like people always have at least like 10 they give me. So yeah, it's just like, it was really overwhelming. So I found like indie was like actually easier to kind of get into. Like it's a little annoying because a lot of times you discover someone on issue 1, and then like indie's obviously much slower. So you're like, all right, I'm really excited for issue 2 in 2 years. So like it takes a while, but it's cool because you kind of connect with people, and it's online is weird because you think you're best friends with someone, but really you've like never met in person and don't know anything about them. but it's like, but yeah, you just like support people and you start to see regular names and start to collect issues and back crowdfunder campaigns and stuff. So
yeah, it's a cool community getting everyone together, and like you said, there's people that in that community that you consider friends or acquaintances of some sort, but it's like you've never met in person. And I know this happens in like the video game space and so many other spaces too, but it is a strange way of meeting people. But
yeah,
2024, like
yeah, like I like grew up in like the internet had like just begun, and it was like, don't talk to strangers, like don't go meet people because they will murder you. And now like that's how you like date and stuff now. Like that's like it's so like what I grew up with versus like what the internet is now. I'm like, it's like stranger danger still exists, but like just go for coffee go for in a public place. So yeah.
Yeah, so you're probably of my generation then, because I was the last generation of we lived without cell phones.
Yeah.
So like I grew up and I got my first cell phone until I was like 18 or 19. And even then it was like a flip phone that all right, kids, just bear with me for a second. It had buttons on it. They had to type in everything.
Yeah, that's like my daughter. She's almost 5, and she's like, "When do I get a phone?" I'm like, "Do you know I had my first phone when I started driving, and it was for emergencies, and I had 15 minutes a month on my phone to call my parents if something happened." It was or 911 was probably still free, but like that's all I had. And like, I don't even know if I could text people. I actually don't know.
Yeah, my first one. So yeah, it was actually 17 because it was when I got my truck. And it was my dad hands it to me with I think like 500 minutes on it, or the prepaid cards. Remember those? And he's like, "You don't use this unless the car is or the truck is broken down or something. Like this is what it's for, and that's it. It has my number in it and your mother's number in it."
Yeah. Yeah. Back when you used to like know people's numbers, because now like everything's just on my cell phone. People are like, "Oh, what's their number?" I'm like, I don't know. Like there's some like comedian who talks about like if you get arrested and you're like you get one phone call and you're like, "Can I have my phone first?" I don't know anyone's number other than my like childhood house.
I'll say I have 2 numbers that I remember to this day. It's my childhood landline. And it's actually my dad's cell phone because that's the same cell phone number he's had since I was like 16.
Yeah. The only reason I know my mom's phone number is because it was like she's not a numbers person, but I had a cell phone number that like she could remember really easily because it was like related to her birthday and stuff. So she like took that cell phone number. I'm like, sure, I don't really care, and I got a new one. So I'm like, you can have it.
That's fantastic. Well, enough old people talk. Let's talk.
Back in my day.
We keep going. I'm going to pull my shorts up to my chest real quick and talk.
Yeah.
But
see how old we can make each other feel.
People can already see the gray hair everywhere. So yeah. So you jumped into this world and you started working with. Is it ASAP Comics or ASPA? Like how do I say it?
So we call it ASAP Imagination. Like way back when it first started, it was ASAP Comics, and then it expanded for novels and stuff. Like we became a full publisher and everything. So we published novels and children's books. So now it's just ASAP Imagination is like the umbrella company. It sounds so corporate when I say umbrella company, but there's like that. And then like below that, we have like the imprint for Eddie One World. And then, in that part, there's ASAP Minis has children's books.
Very cool. And your book that you're currently working on with them is Sister Grimm. And that's part of this whole universe. So what is Sister Grimm, just to start off?
So Sister Grimm was from that flip book. Like that was like kind of a very first glimpse of her origin story. And we've actually started turning that into comics as well. Because again, pros and comic shops, they're kind of like, I don't know what to do with this. People aren't here to read words. I get that there's words in comics and people still read them. But we just started to turn into comics. So we had our first like graphic novel there. But Sister Grimm basically picks up 3 months after that paranormal catastrophic event in an alternate London. And the main character is Lily Connors, and she wakes up in a morgue, and she has no memories of the last 3 months, and she doesn't know if her family's alive, and she wants to find them. But she has these abilities where it makes her very concerned about finding them. Like she's actually concerned that if she finds them, she'll kill them. So so she's kind of like in that like it's very much a story of like letting go who you are and kind of stepping into who you could be. And like she like because she's a doctor, it goes from like had this like big duty to help people and save people, and now she is afraid to even be around people, and it's kind of how she can use these powers to still help people and be who she wants to be. So that's kind of the sum of it. It sounds kind of heavy, but it's like a little melancholy, and then there's like she's some ghosts in it who like she's kind of like a sidekick goat named Bennett. I feel like I just said goat. Ghost. Bennett, who's quite witty and chatty and little narcissist, not narcissist, but kind of full of himself, and so he's chatty.
So you got a little sidekick to bounce some
Yeah,
jokes off
yeah,
of.
to make it a little lighter and not just like I'm super depressed.
So it sounds like it's a little lighthearted, but would you say it's like paranormal horror, or what kind of genre would you
Yeah,
throw it into?
so like again, I said abilities, but it's called Sister Grimm. It's not so like for people who are very intuitive, they might understand it's about Grim Reapers because she becomes a spoiler, but like we have trading cards that say she's a Reaper hybrid, so I don't feel like I know people haven't, not everyone's read it, but you can catch up a little. So, but yeah, she's a Reaper hybrid, so it's like a little very paranormal horror is probably a good description of it. Like I kind of think a little dark fantasy, but there's not really magic. It's more like ghosts and Grim Reapers.
Okay. So you connected with ASAP Comics. They convinced you to do books. You've got this book coming out. How did you get in contact with your artist? Was that through ASAP, or was that somebody you looked for?
So while I was writing it, I was keeping my eye open. It was really tough finding an artist. There's a few people I reached out to that were just fantastic, but outside of my budget or outside of our budget. And then, yeah, like had a few people who were kind of trialed, and then we actually had another title called OPSEC, which is kind of like an X-Files, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of vibe to it, where they're basically like two people are investigating paranormal events. So yeah, so I should mention that there's a whole bunch of titles in this universe, so you can like, they're not like, you don't have to read them all. Like as I just said, like the mainstream comics are so complicated, like you don't have to go and like read OPSEC and Messiah and all that stuff, but they're kind of like, if you want to, it kind of gives you just like a fuller view of the universe. So yeah, like then there's Person, and there's Dead of Night, and then there's also a one shot called Hole, which is, we have like an ASAP solo collection, and that's our first one. And I lost my train of thought in what we were talking about.
How you connected with your artist?
Oh, the artist, yeah. Sorry, tangent. So in OPSEC, Matteo Maciorowski, he was kind of one of the first artists, other than Kyle Wright through Messiah, that kind of reached out to us, I believe. And he's like, hey, are you looking for work? And we loved his style and brought him on. And then we kind of like, hey, do you know any other artists? And he was like, I know all these people. So he basically started sending artists our way. And basically, so he's from Argentina. So we actually have a lot of Argentinian artists that we work with, and a few like Mexico. I think there's another one. I want to say Colombia. But yeah, basically like this community of Spanish-speaking artists and stuff. So my artist, he was working on something with his brother. So he was like, had done some sequential work, and so he had a portfolio, but he had never published anything. So he was pretty new to it as well. And he just had this like gritty watercolor style that was like, yeah, just like really suited the vibe of the story. And so we kind of talked for a sec. So yeah, we started talking, and like he did some kind of trials of like character design, and we're like, yeah, you're the person for this. And then we started bouncing ideas off of each other, and we had some like video chats. And then for the color palette was the one thing where we like, there was a lot of, to be fair, there was a lot of collaboration along the way in general, just because I think because we were so new, like I think like I didn't know what to expect 100%, but I was like, my first script, I was like really prescriptive because I'm like, oh, like I have to like give all these instructions, and it was like first time. And then once started working with him, I'm like, oh, he gets it. So now, like now on issue 3, like it's a little less prescriptive. Like it's, instead of being like this panel, this angle, it's kind of like, yeah, there's 5 panels on this page. Like if I have like specific visions for some things, like this is the main focus of the panel, like I'll do that. But now we kind of just like trust each other. I'm like, yeah, like you're the artist. Like if you think that there's a good way to flow these panels that will be visually appealing or striking, like go for it. And yeah, and then like the color palette was the one where originally it was like we had like the full range of colors, and then we decided to kind of limit it. And we have kind of like a primary color palette of greens and purples and pinks, and then like a secondary palette of like blues and oranges, I think are the kind of the main ones. Sometimes a few skin tones come in. But yeah, so it's basically just kind of creates this like surreal like atmosphere where like it has like this kind of melancholy vibe, and because it's like gritty watercolor and stuff, like it's very, to me, it's like very artsy, and it's not like kind of like typically it's not like super clean lines and stuff. Like he's grittier, so, but it just really suits the story. And yeah, he's been great to work with, and thankfully he's still with us. And we had a letterer who was with us for issues 1 and 2, and they've moved on, so we have a new letterer. And yeah, but Nicolas Nieto, he's the main artist, and he does layouts and pencils and inks and colors and the covers. So yeah, it's great. Yeah, he does a lot.
I was gonna say that's awesome, because shout out to him, because the first thing you notice when you get on the Kickstarter page is you have preview pages up, which we have on the video for people listening. And the color palette's what stands out, like how it's colored. And I always say there's 2 jobs in comics that are like the unsung heroes. One is lettering, because if lettering's good, we just read the comic. If it's bad, then we're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And the other is coloring, because we tend to, and I do it too, we all do it, we tend to just credit the primary penciler. Like it's, so-and-so writing and this artist.
Yeah.
But the colorist does so much to bring everything to life that's in those pencils. And seeing that your pencilist is your colorist, it makes sense. But I thought the job they did here really makes the book stand out from everything else on Kickstarter, especially having that style.
Yeah, yeah, it's unique, and like it's like everything. Like it's not everyone's like gonna be their preference and stuff, but it kind of I do hope that like the story, like I'm one of those, because I'm a writer first, so I'm always just like, oh, like the story will pull me in. Like I don't care as much about like the art styles and stuff. But like, again, like if the art style and color and stuff just doesn't match the story, like it's gonna pull you out of everything, right? So, and then like my first issue doesn't have a ton of dialogue. And I know with like when I was writing with Hades, I'm like, should I have an internal monologue? Should I have a narration? And he was kind of like, just let the artist tell the story. And so we did that. So like it's very like we try to like really tap into the emotions of it. Because she has like a few interactions with people to kind of like give some context and stuff, but it's not really until issue 2 when you meet Bennett. Like, so again, on the screen, like the first issue is her first page up there is from issue 1. And there's I just picked my favorite pages, but they were like, there's no dialogue other than like a few sound effects. I think there's a click.
Yeah,
and then on the second one below, it's issue 2. And like, again, this is a combo of my favorite pages, but also not spoilers. But yeah, so it's like, it's wordier because all of a sudden Bennett comes in and like, she has someone to talk to and like kind of voice her concerns and like all those things. So,
and I like that you added from issue 3, because you say in the campaign that art is still ongoing. It's not 100% complete yet, but you included the blue line pages here, which not only is cool to see like, okay, we do have progress on the book. You're backing something that is in progress and will be completed. But also as a fan of just the industry and comics in general, it's cool to see this is where his art starts with the blue lines, and then you can see where it ends up with his watercolor style.
Yeah, and like, I have the layouts too, but the layouts are quite messy. So that's just like very much like setup thing. I'm like, you know what? I think like the pencils like really like highlights like his skill and stuff too. Like, So yeah, like I want to share that. And as we go along, like I don't know if we'll get to colors during the campaign, because like he's pretty quick. But he is inking some and still penciling. I think he's still penciling the end of the book, and then started inking. Just whatever his preference. I will let artists do whatever they want. Like I like draw, but I don't do sequential stuff. So I get that sometimes you're like, you know what, I don't want to ink today. Like, let's just do pencils. So whatever he wants to do, as long as we're moving forward.
As long as the book's getting done, right? That's all that matters.
Yeah.
So I see on the page you for people that want to back the book, it seems like you're keeping things fairly simple. Do you just have the one cover for the book, or are you doing variant covers?
No, just the one cover. I know that I know variant covers are really popular, but and so many people are like, oh, you should do pinups. I'm like, I'm not gonna make my comics sexy. It's not about that. So yeah, we've just been keeping it really simple. Like the original cover is what you get. Like we have like some extra swag for people who want it. Like there's art prints, and we actually have a little pendant. There's like this like diamond that on the front of the flip book. Again, for people who can see it, we actually have this made so you can have a necklace, and it's a key to the dream realm. And then we're also like, I'm hand painting some skulls right now, so people can like actually have stuff that's like Sister Grimm-ish. Like I'm doing some skulls that are like have lilies on them, or are like in the pink and purple and greens, and but I'm also just like, they're skulls and they're fun. So at some point I'm just like, I'm gonna do whatever I want. So it's like snakes. It's like, what does this have to do with Sister Grimm? Nothing, but you can have a cool hand painted skull. I guess that would be it does have something. And then I have like all the skulls are like divided, because like when you're not going to see her face until like issue 4, but like small spoiler. But like the way it like I've cosplayed it before, and other people have too. Face painted it, so like it kind of has like a big diagonal divide down the face. So that's kind of, I guess, will still be the homage, even if how I painted or decorated is a little kookier and not so comic related. I just want to have fun. Yeah.
You don't want to have any not safe for work covers?
You know what? Maybe not. It's funny. So I have this mini comic called Demon Potatoes. And it's like a little horror, like so it's like 8 pages, and I'm gonna like at some point I'm gonna like write issue 2 and draw it and like put it on Kickstarter. But I'm 100% gonna make a sexy potato just for that. And just because so many people have told me, you're like, oh yeah, sex sells on Kickstarter, and they're right, it does. But like that's not what this is. Like we want people to be interested. It's not that the NSFW stuff doesn't have stories, but like. That's not, we're not just buying this for nudity and sex. So yeah.
I know people who create some of those books, and like they do. I mean, some are just blatant, like, here, give me money for boobs. But but there are guys out there, people out there making books that are actual like good comics. Not my cup of tea, but people like them.
Yeah.
But I always get in trouble because I joke around because I don't get it. I'm like, yeah, do people not have the internet?
Yeah. Like
DeviantArt it's free.
There's a lot of free stuff out there, but it doesn't come with stickers. There. You don't have like matching pasties or whatever. I don't know what people. I haven't paid attention to the other rewards on those kinds of comics.
Oh, I'm writing that down for Pat Shand. You need to have pasties on your next campaign.
Yeah, I'm a wheelhouse of ideas over here.
So for newcomers to the book, everything's available in the campaign. They can add on like the anthology book, all the previous issues, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And then we do have the first issue bundles, but if people want to go crazy, like there's also asapimagination.com has not everything. There's some stuff that's exclusive to the campaign. Like there's stickers and stuff we have like backer goals. So and before this podcast, we were 1 away from like the first sticker goal. And we also have like a dollar amount goal. So there's so as a publisher, we're like through the Anyone world, a whole bunch of people we publish their stuff, but we also just distribute stuff physically and digitally, whether or not we publish people, just to the whole rising tides lift all ships kind of thing, just to help people get more eyes on their stuff and like to try and build a community of people. So we kind of all are just constantly cross promoting each other. But some people have donated some digital issues. So like every time we hit a certain dollar amount, we unlock a new issue. So there's definitely some perks for going through the campaign. Like there's definitely some exclusives and some bonuses that you don't get anywhere else.
I think those are great. I see a lot of campaigns doing it. It's a great idea because especially if you can theme them around your book somewhat, which I know can be tough at times, but it's more enticing for people to jump in. Like if not only am I getting, because let's be honest with everybody, like Kickstarter comics can be expensive.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the way the world works in this indie world. But if you do that and you add on like, oh yeah, and also we have these 5 digital books we gave you. So technically you're getting like 6 books for your whatever.
The value.
Yeah.
So we try to like, and I know our last campaign, like, I think we funded at the very end, we just did like a draw just to like, here's a bonus thing. And if the backer, like we did it for one of our comics. So it was like, if someone did a physical backing, we will send them that. And if they did digital backing, they get the digital version of it. So just again, like, it's cool. It's cool when people actually back you. And like you said, it's not cheap. And then shipping on top of it. Like, unfortunately, I'm in Canada and Hades is in the UK. So in a weird way, it's actually cheaper for me to ship to the US than Canada. So, but again, I know in like the US, there's like media mail. So you can like ship books for like, I think $5, where I'm like, here, I'm like, sorry guys, like we don't have media mail. We're sending it across the border, but we try to make it cheap. And we always give shipping options. So we'll ship literally anywhere, because like, I know for me, like being in Canada, there's so many campaigns in the US where it's US only. And I'm like, I don't want to read the digital version, but I want your book. and so we make that option. But again, I get that it's not always cheap. So the digital options are there. And for people who still want something, for me, I've done both things where I'm like, oh, fine, I'll read the digital and then I read it maybe eventually, like 5 years later. Because it's like, usually when I'm in like a doctor's office, I'm like, okay, fine, I have some wait time or something, like I'll read a comic. But I've also done the thing where I've like backed a comic for like $5 and paid like $30 for shipping. It hurts, but I want that comic. Yeah. So both options are there.
I knew someone that I don't know if they still do it, but they live in Canada, and they knew someone that lived on the border in the US, and they would actually have their book shipped to that person and then drive down to get it, because whatever the customs fee was to ship it from the US to Canada, because their printer was in the US, was more expensive than for them just to drive down, grab it, and drive it back.
Yeah. Well, so we work with Nem, who's down in LA, and George Medina, he's like the letterer on Sistergram, and he's also a writer on Dead of Night. He's in New York. So we do have like options there, but again, with the Kickstarters, like I'm hand painting the skulls. And so I'm like, it has to come from me, or I have to ship it down there and they have to do it. Whereas like printing wise, like, yeah, you could, if we were like, we could in theory like print things down there and like make it a little cheaper, but again, logistically things start to get more complicated that way. Whereas like I can, like, if I'm doing the fulfillment, I'd be like, yes, all these orders have sent out. Whereas if you have like 4 people fulfilling stuff, you could, like, again, people are reliable, but it's just harder to keep track of and stuff. And we're small, and to have to reprint something because something got lost or something, like it does, like every cost does factor into us. Like we've been around, ASAP has been around for 4 years. We do this Anyone Con online every year to basically celebrate, where we do like panels and live drawing and announcements and all that stuff, which is mostly through YouTube, and that's our anniversary as well. So this year we have our 4th year anniversary coming up. I think it's if you haven't like settled, I'm like moving right now, so I'm complicating things because like technically like that the weekend we normally do it, which would be like August, I think it'd be August 22nd and 23rd. is like right when I'm moving. So I'm just like, I'm so sorry. So like, but it'll probably still be that day. I just may be less involved than I normally am. Just pop into the chats instead of being on screen. But yeah, like it's like we've been around for a while, but we're still new, and like costs matter. And so again, like I get that like indie comics can be more expensive, but it is a fundraising, and like you're like every time something funds, you get another thing out there and get a few more fans. So it's cool connecting with people and finding people that like your stuff, or at least willing to take a chance on you.
And those fans are more invested. Like I'm more invested in the Kickstarter books that I back than I am the next issue of Moon Knight. Like, even though I've been reading Moon Knight since I don't know how long, but that book that's only 3 issues in, it's like, but I backed, like, I'm the reason that's being printed, or at least that's how you feel. And it creates a kinship. So it's, I mean, it's just the way of the world in this.
And business. I know like when I like launch it, or when we've launched Kickstarters, especially for the first 24 hours, I feel like every 5 minutes you're like refresh. And then at the like end, if you're like thankfully our last one we funded like in our first 24 hours, Sister Grimm's, like it's a little slower, but it's also a lower price point, so it does make sense. So I'm like, I feel like I'm actually the moving is great because now I only refresh like every 10 minutes instead. but I know like other people, when I'm invested in their campaigns, like I've backed people and like they're like, oh god, they only have 48 hours left and they got 20% to go, and people are so good at rallying. So it's like I feel like most of the times people I've backed, like people have rallied and it's funded, but I get so stressed out for other people. I feel like I'm refreshing their page as much as they are sometimes.
I say there's a lot of people out there that are like really talented that I like, and I'm just like, why isn't this funded in the first day? Like, and then, but you look around and it's just, I mean, there's so many books, and then you got big companies on Kickstarter now, and there's so much pulling people away.
Sponsorship or like advertise. Like I see like Kickstarters like come across my like Instagram all the time, and it's paid sponsor. It's like, we don't quite have that budget. Like maybe for a couple days or something, but there's lots to do.
When you're that certain publisher and your collected edition's got 100K on it, like you can afford to advertise a little bit. You all know who I'm talking about out there.
And there's been a few with like bigger names where it's like, oh, I see you have 30 variant covers, like good work. Congratulations on being able to afford all of the artists.
So if it makes you feel any better, though, I know somebody right now that has their book on Kickstarter, and they're like, hey, let's launch our Kickstarter and ignore the fact that their wife is due 2 weeks into the campaign, and that's not going to put a damper on the Kickstarter at all. So moving's nothing, trust me.
Like I've had like stuff from like the day I launched, like I had a podcast in the morning that is getting like released this coming up week, and then I launched the campaign, and then I literally like drove to like the house we're getting rid of and like went there and packed like for like 9 hours and stuff. Like it's just like it's a lot of coordination. I also have like 2 small children, and thankfully my parents were like looking after them, so I'm like, I feel like I'm like leaning on a lot of people right now. I'm like, hey, watch the kids. Hey, like I need to go like do this and pack a whole bunch of boxes and stuff. So it's like, again, in a weird way, it's been good because it's kind of been distracting. So I get to like kind of spread out where I'm stressed as opposed to just like obsessive compulsive about the Kickstarter. But at the same time, it's just like it's a bit much. I don't really like recommend it.
So you've got, well, when this podcast launches, you'll have 20 days left. As we're talking right now, you're not quite funded, but you're very, very close. Do you have one quick pitch before we close everything up to everybody out there? Why should they back this book?
Again, I guess I know it's new, and I just appreciate people take a chance. I guess if I could give you some comps and stuff. I've been kind of told, so like Ghost Rider has some heavy influences. I've been told it has some Oh, Jessica Jones. I'm like, oh God, I can't think of the name. Some Jessica Jones vibes to it. I was like a huge Buffy fan, so it's definitely got some like Buffy vibes and darkness and humor in there, but with obviously ghosts and Grim Reapers. So yeah, if you're into those kinds of comics and obviously Grim Reapers, ghosts, like give it a check.
And if my listeners and viewers want to follow you further, do you make poor life decisions like social media?
Yeah, I definitely do. I'm still I know it's a bit of everything's a hell site, I guess, these days, but I'm still mostly active on Twitter. I'm at LAURCUNN. And unfortunately my handles are different on every single platform. I like to play hard to get. Come find me. Basically, I'm on Instagram. I like kind of on TikTok and on Facebook, but I feel like ASAP Imagination is, thankfully Hades has been very consistent with that. So he's literally at ASAP Imagination on all of the platforms, and then I tend to get tagged in a lot of posts. So I just tell people to go that way and find me. I also do have a website, which is lacunningham.com.
And to everybody out there, you know the drill. I have all these links in the show notes below, so check out the Kickstarter page down there. Check out Lori's website down there. And if you like what you see, make sure to back the campaign. Lori, the book looks really cool. I love the art. The story sounds really interesting. And just best of luck with the campaign moving forward.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks for having me again.